World War II created armies that vanished into history. But the tiniest British unit to wear Hitler's uniform left a stain its men could never outrun. This is the story of the British Free Corps, a strip of cloth that promised comfort to starving POWs and ended up following them into courtrooms, prisons, and the rest of their lives. It's late on April 19, 1945, in Templin, Germany. A British man in an SS tank uniform walks onto a wooden platform. His name is Douglas Burneville Clay. Polished boots, silver runes on his collar gleaming. He tells the exhausted men in front of him that armoured cars are coming, that Britain will fight the Soviets next, that they're about to be important. Then another British voice cuts through the room. Thomas Haller Cooper, tall, direct, a guy who's actually seen SS combat, leans forward. "You're late, and you've brought nothing." The room goes quiet. There's a nervous laugh, then nothing but silence. The kind that feels heavy. No armoured cars show up. No orders come through. The men say no. Before sunrise, Burneville Clay peels off the uniform, grabs a stolen vehicle with Alexander McKinnon driving, and heads west. Somewhere near Schwerin, they spot a British airborne patrol, and he surrenders. But how did we get here? We need to go back to early 1944, to prison camp barracks thick with coal smoke and boredom. There's a strip of cloth that says British Free Corps, a ticket to better food, a bed without lice, a way out of a bleak camp. A guy named Alfred Vivian Minchin, who used to be a merchant seaman before getting captured, starts recruiting. Next to him is Kenneth Edward Jordan Berry, young, quick smile, speaking plain English in a place where English is rare. They say British, free, and corps, and let those words hang in the air. Then Roy Nicholas Corlander shows up. He's from New Zealand, was captured while serving in the British Army. He watches the pitch unfold and does the math. He's not thinking about politics. He's thinking about not freezing, not starving, and making it through winter without trading his boots for cigarettes. The cloth promises a way out, so he takes it. Minchin tells him about a new unit that will fight against communism alongside German divisions, and then stand ready when Britain realises what's really going on. Berry backs him up with jokes and the glow of being chosen. The numbers are tiny, never more than a handful of guys at a time, maybe 50 or so across the whole thing. But inside a prison camp, even 5 or 6 men with extra bread look like something. The Germans give them a corner, a radio, and the occasional photo shoot. The cuff title does the heavy lifting because it says status. It says you're not just waiting anymore. But reality seeps in. The Germans treat them like curiosities. Orders are vague. Training is half-hearted. They pose for photos and make propaganda recordings. They drill just enough to look like soldiers and just little enough to feel like extras. A Canadian named Edwin Barnard Martin, captured at Dieppe, touches the fantasy and backs away. By March 1944, he's in isolation, and that tells you something's already breaking inside the unit. By late summer, the war itself changes everything. News gets around that the Allies are moving fast and Germans are pulling back across Belgium. On September 3, 1944, Corlander heads toward Brussels with a Flemish SS unit. Next to him is Frank Maton, another English speaker who made the same bet. They rip off their BFC insignia. That cloth that was supposed to keep them safe now looks like a target. The city ahead is about to change hands, and the wrong badge at the wrong corner could get you killed. Brussels on September 3rd into the 4th is chaos. Gunfire cracks everywhere. Vehicles clatter over cobblestones. Courlander and Maton find Belgian resistance fighters. Someone shouts from a doorway. Another guy drags a barricade into place. In the middle of it, Courlander gets hit. He bleeds through a borrowed sleeve. The cuff title is long gone. They pass a cafe with chairs stacked upside down. The chalkboard still advertises coffee nobody can make. The stones are slick with spilled fruit and oil. A woman pulls a kid across the street. A young guy in a cap raises a rifle that's too big for him and yells something like, "Stop!" Courlander answers in English with his hands open. "We're British!" That buys him space. Names buy more. A man in the cap calls for someone older. Within minutes, there are 10 people in the doorway. The fighting pulses. Maton points, a metal shutter half open, muzzle flash showing in the gap. Then Courlander jolts. A round grazes past. The cloth at his sleeve darkens. Blood comes slowly. He speaks without planning to. "I'm hit!" By the morning of September 4th, the corner they're holding is quieter. A British officer in regular uniform steps out from behind a Bren carrier, engine idling like it's breathing. He studies them, not their clothes, them. He walks close enough to smell the sweat and figure out if what he's looking at is fear or a lie. "Name?" he asks. "Roy Nicholas Courlander," comes fast. "We're British." The officer nods. "Sergeant, take them." A corporal writes things down. A medic looks at the sleeve and says, "Hold that there." Paperwork starts in the dust. Courlander becomes a man with a wound and a future again. He stops being a prop. Back at Templin on April 19, 1945, the war is down to its last days. The air smells like sweat and damp wool. Berneville Clay makes his entrance like he owns the place. Tank uniform, polished boots, a voice built for drawing rooms. "Armoured cars are coming," he says. "We'll fight the communists, and Britain will understand." He's offering a neat trick. Walk through the fire under a new name and come out clean on the other side. But he's not talking to idiots. These guys are tired, but they hear bullshit clearly. Cooper doesn't wait for the speech to end. "You're late, and you've brought nothing." That line lands and sticks. Guys shift to see how Clay will answer. He doesn't have one. No engines outside, no orders. The refusal isn't loud, the room just leans away all at once. Clay tries again. Old dream stuff. Britain will come to its senses. The real enemy is in the east. History will forgive anyone on the right side. The men look past him at a window turning grey with evening. What they know fills the air. Fuel is scarce. The Soviets are moving fast. The wrong badge on the wrong street gets you killed. Promises are free. Transport is everything. When Clay decides to run, he grabs a vehicle that isn't his. McKinnon drives. They push west in the dark. At some point, the SS clothes come off and go into a ditch. The dash lights are dim to save the battery. A farmhouse window goes black as they pass. Somewhere near Schwerin, headlights from a British airborne patrol wash over the car. Those guys know how to read what they're seeing. They raise hands. The car stops because the alternative is dying tired. Clay surrenders. What comes next is the machinery of justice. October 3rd, 1945. A room that smells like ink and wool. Roy Nicholas Courlander stands in uniform with no insignia. A clerk reads the charge and the date. The panel weighs facts. 15 years, the voice says. Years later, it gets knocked down to 9. On October 2nd, 1951, he walks out through a gate, but for now, the door closes and time gets thick. January 2nd, 1946. Bow Street. Kenneth Edward Jordan Berry is smaller than the crowd, young in a way that stands out in a courtroom. The defense calls someone who speaks to his character. Somebody uses the phrase, easily led. The magistrate weighs the difference between a boy who smiled for a camera and a guy who named a unit. The sentence reflects that. 9 months. February 5th, 1946. Central Criminal Court. Alfred Vivian Minchin hears aiding the enemy. The cuff title he once held like a ticket is evidence now. The unit he talked about is proof of intent. 7 years. January 11th, 1946. The Old Bailey. Thomas Haller Cooper hears death. It lands hard. People in the gallery sit up straight. Next month, an appeal fails. Then it gets commuted to life. 7 years later, he walks out. In Canada, Edwin Barnard Martin gets tied to allegations that make him look useful to the enemy in ways people around him couldn't forgive. 25 years. In 1954, a pardon clears it away.
The law draws lines. Leaders versus followers. True believers versus men who buckled under pressure. Guys who wanted real combat versus guys who read what others wrote. A man who dressed himself as a savior faces one kind of sentence. A guy who named the unit faces its own. A kid who played along at the back stands different. The sentences reflect that. The cuff title was technically attached to the 11th SS Nordland Division, but not to actually fight. It was there to exist. It was there so Berlin could point and say, even the British. A German non-com counted the titles in neat stacks, checked them off a list, handed them out one by one. He fixed crooked seams. He positioned men for photos. He told a translator to avoid slang because this needs to be understood in London. His competence mattered because the machine that made the BFC look bigger didn't run on fools. It ran on guys who knew how the world looked from outside and what they could fill that view with. But the liaison said no to live fire training because ammunition was tight. Someone suggested a parade. Captain said, not a priority. A German corporal joked that the entire British Free Corps could fit in one truck if they were friends. Minchin's voice got brighter to cover the truth. Berry smiled more. Corlander waited for a day that never came. Across its whole life, roughly 50 to 55 men were identified as members at some point. At most, around 25 to 30 were there at once. The unit officially existed for about 16 months, from early 1944 to May 1945. Yet those months cast a legal shadow that lasted years. There were no recorded combat achievements. A last door closes. A clerk files the page that ends a case. October 2nd, 1951. Roy Nicholas Corlander walks out. The day smells like wet stone. Traffic moves by. Nobody salutes. A bird lifts from a lamppost and comes back. He stands still long enough to feel the air on his face and understand that the cuff title he wore is never coming back. Brands last longer than units. A strip of thread, 3 words, a photograph. They outlive the room where the pitch was made and the street where someone surrendered. For a while, they outlive the men themselves. They become stories told in kitchens, warnings passed between friends. Be careful what you sign up for. Make sure the name you wear won't be the name that destroys you later.
A brand is simple. It fits in a headline. It sticks to memory even when the actual facts are too much to explain in a busy day. That's how a tiny unit punches above its weight in shame. That's how a man can spend years reintroducing himself to people who knew the label before they knew his name. The cuff title sits in a drawer somewhere now. Pick it up and it weighs almost nothing. The weight was never in the cloth. It was in the choice to wear it, the choice to take it off, and the words written after.